Hello again, friends. So in this video, we're going to learn how to mutate variables and also the how and why of JavaScript and how it does type coercion. Now, before we talk about any of that, I do want to show you one last variable type that I didn't show you earlier. So to show that, I am going to say var, and this one I'm going to be typing job. Okay, so now the difference here is that I'm not going to assign anything to this variable. So here I can declare a variable but not assign a value to it. So I want you to see what happens when we now take a look at this variable. So I'll just write console.log and job. Now, can you guess what's going to happen here? I'm sure you can. So when we go to our browser, we see here that, yes, it is undefined coming from script.js at line 13. So this line here prints an undefined to the console. So remember that when I showed you that slide, I mentioned that undefined means non-existent, and that's the case right here. All right, so we declared the variable, but we didn't assign any value to it, and so therefore job is simply undefined. And that's what we see in the console. So we can then later go back and assign it to something. So let's say job is student. And what you see here is that I declared variable here, but then I assigned a variable to it here. So if we just do the console log this time again, so I'll just write console.log and job. And then when we go to the browser, we'll see student. And there you go. So from line 13, we still see undefined because when we log this variable to the console, we haven't declared a value to it yet. But from line 16, this is where the student comes in after we have declared it in this line above. So basically, we have strings here. We have numbers. We have a Boolean, and we also have the undefined right here. So these four are the most important data types that I want to show you. All right, so now we'll go ahead and move on in this lecture. We'll learn the variable mutation as well as the coercion type. So we'll continue with our example of Alex here, and we'll learn all about the variable mutation and type coercion. All right, so what I'm going to do is reuse some of these variables. So name is still Alex. And we've also defined the school number as 20. We'll leave it there. All right, so we have defined two different data types, string and number. But let's see what happens if we want to print them together on the console. Now you'll see what happens. So we'll give it some space here, and I'll write console.log. So let's basically do a string which contains Alex and 20. Okay, so inside the console.log, we can say name, and then we can use the plus symbol. And we're going to explain a little bit later that this is an operator. But for now, let's just simply use this here to join the strings. So then we can do a space and then another plus to add the school number. Okay, so we are hoping that this here will then become Alex space 20 in the console. But before we do that, I want to console log this school number here as well. All right, so here I'll say console.log school number. Okay, so let's check it out. I'll go to my browser. And here we have Alex 20. Okay, so how did this work? Because remember that school number here is actually a number and not really a string, but it still logs here as a string in this entire Alex 20 string. So this works thanks to something called type coercion, okay? And what that basically means is that JavaScript automatically converts types from one to another as needed. Pretty convenient, huh? Now again, in this specific case, it has converted this number here to a string in order to be able to join these three strings. So Alex is a string, then the space here is also a string, and then school number, the number will automatically be converted by JavaScript to a string as well, so that it can then join all of these strings into one bigger string. So I don't know, am I the only one here that thinks that's pretty cool that JavaScript will do this work for us automatically through the process called type coercion? Now, other programming languages are not like this. We would indeed have to convert our variables, but because JavaScript is kind of easier to use, it takes all that work away from us and we'll do it automatically. Now, joining strings like this here is just one of the many examples of type coercion that we're going to encounter throughout this course. So I just want you to know that type coercion here happens all the time in JavaScript. All right, so why don't we try out another example with, so let's join some strings and create some more variables. So I'm going to show you something a little different, which is basically just to declare many variables on the same line and then define them later on. So here I'll say var school name to say Alex's school name, and then we can also define a variable called hasCourse. Okay, so here, before we define a variable here, job, and then later here, we assigned a value to it, right? So this time we declared both of these variables here, and they are still undefined. All right, so that's what we had here. So I declared the variable job in this case, and it was then undefined. Now, only later in this line did I then assign a value to that variable. And that's exactly the same thing that we're doing here. So we're going to declare multiple variables on the same line, and then I assign values to them here on these different lines. Alrighty then. It's actually a pretty common practice in case we want to declare many variables all at once. It's a bit cleaner to do it like this and all in one line, and then simply assign the values a bit later. So here, what I want to do is give some value to these variables. So I'm going to say school name equals, and then I'll say Oak Academy, and hasCourse equals true. Now what happens if we want to log to the console a variable that has a Boolean in here? It's included. So let's just try it out with console.log. All right, console.log, and inside of that, I'll say school name. And plus has 35 courses, plus does it have any course, plus, and then hasCourse. Now here we can ask a question, and let's see what happens when we try to join the hasCourse variable here into this string. So let's go to the browser and refresh the page. And here, Oak Academy has 35 courses. Does it have any course? True. And so I hope that you notice that even the Boolean here gets converted to a string. Yeah, so JavaScript also does type coercion with Booleans. Now remember that we have here another Boolean variable, and that is registered. And here in the console, its color is going to be different because it's a Boolean, but it does get converted anyway. So now let's just delete it out here. And let's see, it should say undefined. Okay, so you see how even the undefined is coerced into a string. All right, so basically it's converted automatically into a string. So now let's take the hasCourse again. And ta-da, I suppose. So sure enough, that is basically what the type coercion does. Something else that I pointed out to you and that hopefully you learned is how to declare multi-variables on one line. And then later on, in this line, we assigned values to these variables. So now if I take this school name, put it into quotes. What do you think we're going to see in the console? Can you predict? So I'll just go to my browser, and here I'll refresh my page. And now instead of Oak Academy, I just see school name, right? Because this school name is not a variable. It's just a string. You got it. All right. So that's pretty much all you need to know about type coercion. So we are going to, let's just pause right here, and we're going to pick it up in the next video. So I'll see you in the next section.